Since the summer of 2022, Kansas 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline connects callers to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and offers a broad range of services for people experiencing a mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis. This is especially important in the midst of the holiday season. Hi, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. I'm Gary Shorman, and our show deals with leading with challenging times for those who may not only use a helpline, but oversee a 988 suicide helpline. They face challenges far beyond the holidays. Today, our guest, we're pleased to have Dr. Tia Dole, who's the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline Officer at Vibrant Emotional Health, a mental health company that administers the Kansas 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline. Dr. Dole, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's good to have you here and your team. I know we have some others that are joining us off your team as well, but as spokesman for that whole 988 Lifeline product, when it was introduced here in Kansas in 22, it was described as one of the most exciting things that has ever happened in mental health care. Has that, from your experience, is that the way it has turned out, or are your calls centers getting overwhelmed?
So a little known fact, the Lifeline has been around for 20 years. And so the Lifeline actually has been available in Kansas for the last 20 years. It was a 1-800 number. What launched in 2022 was a 3-digit number. So Congress had passed some legislation that allowed us to, when someone is in the middle of a crisis, dialing an 11-digit number feels like a lot. And so having a 3-digit number, we thought was really important to increase accessibility. So it's always been, right, 20 years. I have to say, because I'm involved with the Lifeline, I'm a little bit biased, but I do think the idea that within 2 years, 10 million folks reached out to us is pretty incredible. So we had 10 million contacts actually in under 2 years. And so when you think about the fact that the Lifeline is free and it's anonymous, that's an incredible achievement.
One of the things I know we talked about going into this is that many people don't know about this, but
Mhm.
988, you hit the 3-digit 988 and you get to your service.
Mhm.
You mentioned a 10 million people number
Yeah.
that had reached out. That seems like a lot, but are there still those that aren't aware of the service?
Oh gosh, about 15% of people in this country have heard of it. So you can do the math in your head about what that would look like if, let's say, 50% of people have heard of us. And so part of why, I talk to folks, lovely folks like you, is to make sure that anybody in crisis knows that we exist, and that they can reach out and they shouldn't actually wait until it's an emergency. We want to make sure that folks know that we're here before they are in crisis as well.
When you say emergency,
Mhm.
everybody has a different level of emergency, but
Mhm.
when would you recommend somebody just reach down and hit the 988 number?
No, the way that it works is that if you're calling from Kansas, you're going to be routed to your local call center, and that local call center, let's say an individual will pick up the call and say, 988 Lifeline, how can I help you? And you can say, hey, I actually been struggling with depression, and you can talk to them about what's going on in your life, and then they can say, hey, where do you live? Oh, you live in Topeka. Great. There is a clinic in Topeka that actually has some availability to take folks. And so what 988 is, not only can it de-escalate folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis, but it can also connect people to services, so that they can avoid going into a crisis. And, frankly, parents call us all the time saying, my kid, something's going on with my kid. I don't know what to do. And then because local call centers answer those calls, and because they know about all the local resources, you as a parent can get help. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be about you. The point of 988 is to prevent suicide. And, preventing suicide isn't waiting until someone's standing on a bridge. There are a lot of steps that can happen before we get to that point, so that we can actually prevent that crisis.
I know some people will ask, is this free?
Yes, totally free.
So you can call, you get the kind of a judgment-free, compassionate support.
Yep.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yes, sir.
And when they call, they get that direct connection to somebody local.
Yep.
Why would someone not want to call?
There is the fear of stigma, right? And so, when you have something called the suicide crisis line, lots of folks have different ideas about suicide. And that even when people themselves are thinking about suicide, folks often feel a lot of guilt and shame, particularly, let's say, if you're of a specific faith, religious faith. The idea of it might make you feel like, actually, I don't want to talk about this. And so, what we found in our research actually is that certain demographics have more barriers, right? So, middle-aged white men are least likely to reach out to us. And I don't know who listens to you, but my hope is that there's a bunch of middle-aged white men listening to you. So I'm talking to them specifically saying, there is no judgment. Lots of men are in the same situation. Please reach out to us. We want to help.
And certainly it is confidential.
Yeah.
So you can reach out and touch base and maybe get some feedback and direction that can help you in the right way. So how do you staff this? Because you talk about the number of people that call in and have all types of questions.
Mm.
Where do you find the right people to help?
So we're part of a network of crisis centers, right? So some states, so it's sort of like state by state. So some states have one crisis center that answers all the calls for the state. Other states, like Ohio, has like 18. And, the state kind of makes a decision about how many call centers they want to answer the calls. And the way that the crisis centers are really just incredible organizations. And frankly, the people who answer these calls are incredible people. If you think about what it would be like to help people all day long. And they find people, just in the local neighborhood. I think that the call centers who who allow people to work remotely, frankly, have a better chance of finding people, right? You have someone who potentially is working part-time, maybe they're a parent, or maybe they're caretaking someone else. But all the crisis centers are accredited by an accrediting body in the United States. And all crisis counselors receive, 40 hours of training, and then they have ongoing training. And then we actually monitor calls, chats, and texts to make sure that they're high quality. And so there are a lot of things in place to make sure that the crisis counselors are doing a good job. But it really does start with the idea that a person wants to help people for a living, and what an incredible job that is.
We haven't even talked about the holidays, but I assume there are peak seasons for
Yeah,
people to call.
right.
Why are the holidays so stressful? When you get the calls come in, obviously there's a lot of family. In many ways, you think, boy, that ought to be a joyous time, but for some, it's not. Why
Right.
is that?
And I think that what is it? You can't pick your family. And not everybody's family is nice. And obviously a lot of folks have different, history with their family. And so oftentimes coming home can be incredibly stressful. But it's not just about the family being stressful. It can be also about having lost people. Let's say having holidays without someone that you really love, a parent or even a child. It actually, everybody's like decorating, right? I love decorating. You should see the number of lights in and around my house. But losing a parent, for instance, that you've spent the last, 50 something years celebrating with, it can actually make it very stressful. And then the stress is also compounded by everybody being like, why aren't you happy? And so we try to make sure that we're available, and we actually have resources on our website about what you can do. But the number one thing that you can do when you're with family is number one, make sure you get some time apart. And then number two, coming back to the idea of like, you're allowed to feel whatever you feel. If you're feeling anger, if you're feeling frustration, if you're feeling anxiety, a lot of folks are always trying to suppress their emotions and feel bad about what they're feeling. And if you just say, hey, listen, Uncle Larry is a jerk, and I know this to be true. And he's gonna say things when we sit down at the table. Everybody has an Uncle Larry, one drink too many, and you're like, okay, this is enough. And so, and being not feeling guilty about not liking someone, I think is a first step.
Well, I assume this is also not a one-call deal. I mean, you can make one call. What's the next step after the first call to
You know,
this,
it really
and
depends
how do
on
you
the
follow
person.
up?
Right. It depends on the person, right? If a person is calling who is actively suicidal, what could happen is that what we'll try to do is if a person says like I'm going to end my life within a certain time frame, we'll try to de-escalate them and then say, "Hey, can we call you back in 12 hours or 24 hours?" If we feel that this person is de-escalated. If the person is not de-escalating, they're like, "Actually, I'm gonna go through with my plan," what we'll do is we'll try to talk to them about talking to someone who's potentially in their, space. Can you go see your doctor? And there are times if we feel really strongly that the person is at imminent risk, that we will involve emergency services. And I do think that that is an important thing for folks to know, that that's a possibility. And that's probably the biggest point that makes people nervous about using the lifeline. Well, could emergency services end up at my house? Yeah, yeah. You know why? Is because we think it's so important that we are preventing people from dying, that you could have, an ambulance show up at your house. But that's really, really rare, actually, relatively speaking. And so it's really most of the calls, most people actually de-escalate. They either accept a call within 24 hours or we connect them to services. And in certain states, you have mobile crisis, which I believe you have in Kansas, right? So they can say, hey, someone can come out to visit you within 36 hours. Are you interested? And oftentimes the person will say yes. And then someone will come to their house and say, hey, what's going on? How can we help?
Hey, this is good stuff for the holidays. We're going to take a quick break and come back with our guest, Dr. Tia Dole, who's with the 988 Lifeline. Coming back with more after this.
Since 1776, the United States of America continues to stand tall. It's been tested before, many times. Through grit and the ability to move forward, we create better tomorrows. We help our clients live their best lives to and through retirement. We make it easier. Thank you, Kansas. Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. Our guest is Dr. Tia Dole, who is with the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's the 988 number that you can call for suicide support and being able to get the emotional crisis support that you need. Dr. Dole, we went into the break talking about those things that individuals can do and what they can expect. I want to ask you a little bit about your background. How did you get started? We talk about leadership in challenging times. You're leading this national lifeline with vibrant emotional health. How did you get to your position, and who are your mentors to get there?
Oh gosh, sometimes I still don't know. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and when I was I've been working in mental health for about almost 30 years. And I think I ended up working with folks who were suicidal just my tolerance for risk. One thing that folks don't know is that a lot of clinicians struggle to work with suicidal people because it's anxiety producing. The idea that a client could hurt themselves or end their life is really, really challenging and scary. And I think this as a young person, I had a higher tolerance for risk. And so, I just ended up working with a lot of people who were suicidal. I love working with people with, intersectional identity, folks of color, LGBTQ folks, and disproportionately, you have certain populations who are more likely to be suicidal. And actually, I started out in early psychosis, and within early psychosis, about 40% of kids who are developing schizophrenia make a suicide attempt in their first year of conversion. And so I just ended up with like a lot of experience working with people, and I ran some crisis lines. I worked in hospitals, and I think that what I love about it sounds like a weird thing to say about working with people who have suicidal thoughts is just frankly the diversity of people, right? It's not just one type of person. It doesn't matter who you are. You can have any type of diagnosis and still be suicidal. And so frankly, it's like every person is is so unique, and it keeps me on my toes, but it also is it's so meaningful to work with people who are trying to live and doing everything in their power, ultimately speaking, by seeing a therapist. And so, I ended up in this, and I think there's a lot of luck about how I ended up with this amazing job.
You mentioned, going to the Break a website. Vibrant Emotional Health is a company that backs this. There is a website. Talk about that website just a little bit.
So we have 988lifeline.org, and you can connect with us there, right? So you can call us, you can text us, or you can go on like a web-based app on 988lifeline.org. And then we have some resources on there. And then on vibrant.org, we have actually a lot of information. We have something called our impact page where you can drill down by state about who's reaching out and why they're reaching out, which I think is actually an incredible resource, and being like, okay, what's happening in Kansas? How many people are reaching out? What are the top 5 issues about why people are reaching out? How is this segmented by demographics? And I think that type of information is somewhat helpful, especially, frankly, for family members who are like, is it just my kid, or is it just my brother or sister? No, there's a real suicidal crisis in this country. In 2022, 50,000 people died by suicide that we know of. And, which you really, if you think about it, every 10 minutes, someone is dying by suicide.
Well, when you talk about 10 million people making a call,
Yes.
it is important that the 988 number. If you know somebody who needs it, if you want to call that number yourself because you know somebody, it sounds to me like it's open to anybody that is a family member, a friend of, to help get someone on the path to being healthy once again mentally. And so I appreciate all the work you and your team do to do this. I don't know how many of those 10 million calls come from Kansas, but I know that there is the same issue here in Kansas that there would be in any other state in the country. And so for
And I
you guys
think,
to take that on, thank you so much.
I appreciate that. But I will say is that, people are really struggling for connection. There's something that's happened that people feel incredibly isolated. And the idea that, the average call is 13 minutes. The idea of after 13 minutes that someone could feel connected and helped, that's the power of human connection. And so, that's what we're really relying on.
Well, let's invite people. They do have an issue. If something comes up, to give you guys a call. Not only that, you're friendly people too. Having a chance to talk to you a little bit. You guys are great folks, and I know others you connect with, but I do appreciate the work because we all know people who need to call the number. Some may be listening right now themselves that need to call the number. It's a great way to get help, especially during the holiday seasons, because we want the holidays to be special for everyone. And you guys make that happen. So thank you so much.
You.
Our guest today is Dr. Tia Dole, who's the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline Officer at Vibrant Health. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available for free for those of us in Kansas and others around the country. Hope you take advantage of it if you need to. Thank you for listening to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. It's brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.